First off, where's Lisa from Zappos? I owe her a thank you. I had a slight difference of opinion with the good folks at Southwest yesterday, and was unable to make the cocktail party. So thank you and thanks to the folks at Digiday for being flexible on the schedule. So I thought we're going to talk about sort of what some of the leading trends, I guess you'd call them, in ad tech, and I like to get into the sort of broader idea of marketing technology or marketing software as a service. A little bit of background first. I think most people here have titles like business development or CRO and whatnot that you're all familiar with, but so I thought I'd tell a little bit about me. I grew up about 2 hours north of Toronto with a broadcast tower in my backyard. When people ask me how did I get interested in ad technology, that's really where it started. It's, I like to, the second oldest ad serving technology after the printing press. For the younger people in the audience, it does outdate DoubleClick by a few years. The one here on the left is what it originally looked like when I was growing up, this sort of orange and white thing. They rebuilt it about 15 years ago. It looks much more like the one on the right-hand side here. That's important for two reasons, really. Is first, what it provided was a summer for my dad and I to play with a lot of construction equipment, which was really fun. They leave a lot of keys under the seats. Second is that when you go home on Christmas Eve and you have a few eggnogs and you go trouncing up through the snow to try to climb the tower, you actually go inside now. And you don't climb on the outside of the tower. So as I tell my mother, it's much, much safer now. So that's the first key takeaway about ad tech is safety first. So a little bit more real background. So I do equity research for BMO Capital Markets. I actually started out of college doing hotels and casinos. So notwithstanding a long-time love of media and technology, I took a step down for events like this to start covering this industry. I did start in broadcasting, and eventually with my old boss as a junior added all of the big internet names, Google, Yahoo, did things like Aquantive and Digitas once upon a time. I started covering my own stocks in 2008, and it really started with a group of the ad agencies, which I always say has been a vital element for me to start with the buy side of the industry and understand how marketers think and how that flows through the ecosystem from there. Eventually my old boss left. I took all the big guys, Google and Facebook and whatnot, and I added the big media companies earlier this spring, and that's important because companies like Disney and 21st Century Fox are really starting to look at ad technology and understand where they can use it for their businesses more, and that's really what all my research is about, is that convergence of the TV and broader traditional media world with all the stuff that you guys focus on. At the very bottom there, you'll note I first covered, in the first group of 7 companies that I started with in 2008, included Omniture, which, as many of you I'm sure are aware, was since acquired by Adobe and became the foundation for their marketing technology business. The title of that report was From Web Analytics to Digital Marketing Hub, and that was the first time I used that expression, and I write a bunch of reports with that as the title, and this was always the idea I always had in my head. It's one half having learned how Omniture worked and what software as a service was and the ability to see all this data in real time, and then it was also partly visiting a lot of my hedge fund clients and seeing these giant sets of screens in front of them and see what they did in real time. And this is happening. I saw a Hewlett-Packard ad last night where they showed where they're building this type of thing for I think it was NASCAR that they did it. So this is the CMO's office of the future. I really believe that. And I think to take a step back, it's important to remember We always talk about ad tech, and we'll get into some of those individual catchphrases that are on your bingo card and whatnot in a second. But I always like to start with my clients by saying, let's move beyond advertising, right? Advertising is only about half of marketers' budgets. There's another $400 billion or so spent on direct marketing. There's about another $150 billion or so spent on agency fees, on Nielsen ratings, on marketing technology and automation systems. So, when you think about your TAM, your total addressable market for these type of businesses, it's not the $500 billion in advertising. It's a much bigger idea that all starts with the CMO and with that idea, basically. So, to talk a little bit about the technology, and by the way, feel free to jump in and ask any questions midway. I'll take them at the end as well, but I'm happy to be heckled. It usually starts with a lot of these things that are on the bingo card here this morning. And that's things like ad exchanges and demand-side platforms and sell-side platforms, and all of these point solutions that have emerged really since the ad exchange model became established in the sort of 2006, 2007 time period, largely at Right Media, which Yahoo eventually acquired. I think most people are probably familiar with what I call the Web 1.0 era tools, ad serving, analytics, email service providers. So again, starting to bridge more into that marketing SaaS and marketing automation type of area. But even more importantly is you can go back to the 70s and the 80s and the origins of database marketing. Companies like Acxiom, which are moving very aggressively into the data management platform area. We're going to see a new product launch from them next week. Their roots go back to 1969 was when they were founded and started building big and maintaining big customer databases, that first-party data that you heard about from the first group of speakers, and really putting that into direct mail. And over time added things like point of sale call centers and whatnot, and now all of those companies are layering on these digital channels as well. But I always think that perspective is important. Ad tech didn't start when Brian O'Kelly invented the ad exchange, as he likes to say, but it actually goes back to that sort of IBM era of big databases. So the other thing that's happening, I find more and more today, is those point solutions that we went through there before are becoming increasingly difficult to use. When I look at a company or an ad tech or marketing software company in this space, I ask these questions, which is people, technology, and data. What is the collection of those things that you offer either buyers or sellers? The people area obviously has been dominated by the agencies for many years, and they've come on the scene with the agency trading desks, and despite sometimes being kicked around a little bit, I find I see a lot of ad tech companies that are quite impressed with the trading desks and how quickly the agencies moved to make sure they had a place in here, and a really helpful place to help their clients understand all of these different vendors, which ones they should curate for each individual client. But there's also lots of other people as well. Technology companies, like many of you in the room, have your managed services and systems integration folks to help get the technology in place and working. This great role that I love, data scientists that are increasingly being hired to help analyze all of that data. But it's an important message. If this business leads to complete automation and people go away, there are no more conferences like this. So it's important to remember that people matter. Technology, again, this is where these point solutions often come in and get discussed. It all starts with code, and code builds algorithms, And again, codes tends to be written by people still. This is where software as a service and the idea of logging into a platform rather than licensed software starts to come in. And then at the very bottom, I always like to keep the perspective that devices and networks matter a lot, whether it's this flat screen TV, an iPad. The way device form factors change is really important, and the networks. None of this works unless you have devices and a pipe to get the content and the ads there. So something I'm really interested in right now is the leap up to 4G and what that means for mobile behavior as we get sort of real, true video-capable wireless networks expanding out beyond just Wi-Fi. And then lastly is data, and sometimes data and technology get conflated together. I think of technology as the engine in the car and data as the fuel. Hopefully there's a person driving that car, but as usual, Google is trying to address that as well. You heard a little bit about first-party versus third-party data. I sometimes get chastised for using the second-party idea. That's just simply a way to, if you assume that the brand is the first party, the publisher would be the second party. The publisher has a lot of important data too, and is increasingly capitalizing on that. And then, like I said, ratings, market research, that's about a $40 billion industry globally. When you look at any data exchange, new data system, real-time data in this, that's a huge pile of money to go after and automate the idea of panels. We can spend some time talking about Nielsen's role as a rating system, but there are currencies that you use to buy ads, at least those priced on a CPM basis. And then just the last one to mention is online versus offline. So much online data is anonymized for obvious reasons. Most offline data isn't. It's the magazine company that knows your name and your address and your zip code. And the way these clients recently on this idea of we've ad tech, which sits in this bucket, that's the demand side platform and the exchanges and whatnot. And then there's marketing SaaS, and there's this giant canyon between them. And from a financial analyst standpoint, what really matters here is not so much these buckets, but how do these companies generate revenue? And so something I've been talking about with them a lot lately is this spectrum of revenue models. And on one end, you have what is typically more characterized with a media buying business, which is a pure commission business, percent of spend, eat what you kill type of idea. At that extreme end of the spectrum, there's no guarantees. Of course, every ad tech company has minimums for spend. You may start with none, but eventually for a client to come in the door, you say, okay, we'll do this work for you, but you got to guarantee at least a little bit. So that's the one end, and that comes with things like traffic acquisition costs and that dreaded word arbitrage, and what the risks for those type of models are, budget shifting. There's somebody here that I stood behind in the taxi cab line yesterday, listening to them on their cell phone talking about exactly that. They didn't have a hotel company I'll leave unnamed visibility on their budget yet in December. I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. On the other end of the spectrum is SaaS, and this is software as a service, and a phrase that gets investors' eyes lit up. And again, at the very end of that spectrum, at the extreme example, what you have is a 100% subscription business. And I like to call that idea cable SaaS. No matter how much television I watch in a month, it could be 2 hours, it could be 200 hours, I still pay Time Warner Cable $100 a month, putting aside anything I buy on VOD or whatnot. But that's an annuity stream essentially, and that's something that investors typically like. In between this is some combination of the two, and that's what I like to call cell phone SaaS. And again, I go back to covering Omniture once upon a time. That's how they always described their revenue model, was a cell phone model, was, yeah, there's a minimum payment and a license or a subscription that a user has for the platform, but there's a big amount of variability in the revenue based on volume. And that remains the case for pretty much every company in this space, ad tech or marketing SaaS, whichever one you call them. So what I've started doing when I meet these companies is, ask me, tell me, okay, on day one of your business year, how much revenue do you have booked? That's what ultimately matters here. But what you're seeing in the landscape is because of investors' interest in software as a service and the consistency of that model, you're seeing more and more companies sort of maybe reposition, tell their story a little differently, using words like CRM or marketing automation a little bit more, and not ad tech. It is unfortunately a bit of a tricky word in the investor community because it has come to be associated with this idea of the pure commission model, which again, there's a lot of minimums that are baked into that. So, that's, this is, for me, has become a pretty important idea in this space, and trying to help people understand, how do these companies actually make money. So just the last slide here, just a few sort of other topics to touch on quickly, or at least the public companies first to touch on here quickly. The big guys, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, all have some sort of programmatic strategy at this point. Google and Yahoo actually have tools for third parties to use. DoubleClick is a 8,000-pound gorilla probably in this space. Facebook simply has Facebook Exchange. That's just an on-ramp. There's no third-party services there. That's something that we're trying to get across. Of course, the agencies. But when you get into this marketing SaaS idea, you start to pull in companies like Salesforce and Adobe, and the data guys as well. Nielsen, Experian, Alliance Data Systems, you may not recognize. They own Epsilon. The smaller guys, AOL, Millennial Media, Tremor, MDC Partners, Barry Lowenthal's here, and a few of the other folks from their great agency. Some of the other smaller marketing SaaS players and smaller data players here. And then, a few companies that I'm looking at to see what they do in this area would be LinkedIn. I think they're doing some work on their ad-serving technology, and I would expect to see a programmatic on-ramp to their ad inventory similar to Facebook Exchange still. The IT services companies increasingly nudging their way into pitches alongside the agencies to use their experience with digital technology, and oftentimes a relationship that goes a little higher up, not just the CMO, but to the CEO. That's an important differentiation for them. And then SAP and Oracle, the two big enterprise software companies. Oracle has done a few things, but I think a lot more could come. And then just lastly, I just want to touch on these topics, really quickly. Is there's all this talk about the ad tech shakeout, and that these companies are going to have to start merging, and I understand. I've spoken to many marketers that don't like the confusion. The thing that I like to emphasize is these are really lightweight businesses. If you run into trouble with budget, you pull back on traffic acquisition. I always like to cite ValueClick in 2009, the worst year for advertising in a long time, actually raised their margins that year because they doubled down and took it and were very cautious. And again, lightweight businesses where really you can have a coder, a salesperson, and an Amazon Web Services and Teradata relationship, and you're off and running the space. So these businesses are quite hard to kill. The other thing is, remember, consolidation has been ongoing really ever since Google first acquired DoubleClick and really kicked this off. Programmatic upfronts, something we're going to hear a little bit more about. I think that's more of a marketing term, but what is important is the idea of automating more direct sales. And AOL and Yahoo are really leading the way there, and I'm interested to see what they have to say on that front. Some of the agencies are starting to do television consortiums around using programmatic more. And then the last one is the big agency merger, and which killed a couple of my weekends in July. But the one thing I'd make about it is that the commentary around it seems to be focused around competition with technology. Agencies, with few exceptions, are generally not technology providers or builders. They're not set up that way. But what it does matter about is data. And I always use the simple example of a Google search auction. There's very asymmetric information there. As a bidder, you know what you bid and whether you won or lost. Google sees everything. And that merger's not going to change that necessarily, but that's what I believe that merger is strategically about, at least, is trying to even that up a little bit. So I've gone over my time, so I'll quit there. Anyone, you want to ask a question?